Hello, welcome to the Her Mood Mentor YouTube channel. My name is Jess. I'm a women's health practitioner and nutritional therapist who specializes in hormonal mood disorders. And today I want to talk about something that in the PMDD space I've never heard discussed. Now, if you're new to PMDD, this is one of the hormonal mood disorders that I work with. I personally lived with this disorder, undiagnosed and misdiagnosed, for 17 years, and it nearly led me to ending my life, as suicidal ideation is a major symptom of PMDD. This conversation that we're going to have today, like I said, I've never heard anyone talk about this, but it is something that was so prevalent in my lived experience with PMDD, and it is the physical depression that takes over the body during the luteal phase of the menstrual cycle. If you are dealing with moderate to severe psychological premenstrual symptoms, things like mood swings, irritability, anger, rage, depression, anxiety, the drive to socially isolate, this is another symptom that wouldn't be categorized in the symptomology, but I really see play out and I hear my clients talk about regularly, and so I wanted to cover in this video, and I'm so excited because it's juicy, so stick with me. So the physical depression, we can also use the correct term for that, which is flexion, and that is when the body is moving forward, curling over. We see this as people age, they move into flexion, but we also see this when you're scared, when you're overwhelmed, when you're depressed, you move into this flexion state. And we're also in this flexion state a lot because we're working on our computers and we're on our phones. But in this context, we're going to be talking about it more as a physical depression that comes from the psychological symptoms. When you're dealing with automatic negative thoughts, when you're dealing with depression, it impacts your body, it impacts your posture, it impacts your breathing, it impacts your digestion, all of that. And we can see that in this flexion. Many of my clients will tell me they just wake up and their partners or their roommates can see this in their body. This just crushing, like gravity is crushing you down because these psychological symptoms can be so severe. And I want to talk a little bit about why this happens, one of the reasons why this happens, because it's very fascinating to me when we get into the physiology. So the hormonal mood symptoms primarily occur, specifically with PMDD, during the luteal phase of the menstrual cycle. If you're new to the menstrual cycle, welcome. There's a lot to learn. There are 4 phases. Don't feel ashamed if you don't know this, because I didn't learn this until I was 28, which should be criminal. But the luteal phase comes after ovulation and before the menstrual cycle. It can be on average 14 days, but can technically be around 9 to 18 days in length. So that's quite a long time. For many of us, it's around 2 weeks that these hormonal mood symptoms can be taking place. And this flexion, this physical depression can be occurring and perpetuating some really negative health outcomes, which we'll get into. So this is occurring during the luteal phase of the menstrual cycle. And what else is occurring? So you have just ovulated. Your body doesn't yet know if conception has occurred. That pregnancy hormone, HCG, isn't coming online to signal to the brain, hey, we're pregnant or we're not. So what happens is your immune system needs to be weakened during this period of time in order to facilitate conception and the implantation of that embryo into the uterine lining. Otherwise, your body would attack that and no humans would ever be born again, which is not cool. So your immune system is depressed, and with that, and with the rise in progesterone as well, comes some symptoms. One of those symptoms, because the immune system is depressed, is kind of your body gets on guard. Your fight or flight, your central nervous system is more easily activated during this time because your immune system is depressed. So you're more susceptible to pathogens. And the pathogen exposure could hinder the safety of the implantation of that embryo. Are you following me here? So you actually you don't want to be touched. You don't want to be social. And this isn't because something is wrong with you. This is a biological mechanism that is occurring to protect you in this potential new life from pathogens, but it's playing out in behavior, which is super fascinating, not super fun necessarily. This is also why you might notice you have lower libido during this time. Well, you're not fertile, so why would you have high libido? But you also are susceptible to pathogens. Your cervical fluid, that stuff that you find in your underwear that you maybe still are grossed out by, changes throughout the different phases of the menstrual cycle to help with conception. And during the luteal phase, it actually changes its structure, cellular structure, and becomes antimicrobial and antibacterial. And that is crazy. So that is also in line with your immune system being depressed. Your cervical fluid is actually trying to protect you from pathogens. Okay, so maybe some of this physical depression is starting to make a little bit more sense to you now that you have more of an understanding of the physiology behind it. But this is not fun, to feel like you don't want to be touched, to want to socially isolate. And we're talking about the severe end of the spectrum here. All females experience some degree of this, but symptoms with PMDD are more severe. So it really can play out as you're not leaving your room, you're not getting out of bed, you're having these automatic negative thoughts over and over, which just continue to move you really into a fetal position, into that flexion. So today I want to teach you 2 techniques that I have personally used to combat this on a regular basis that drive that feeling, that the psychological symptoms that are coming along with my menstrual cycle and heightening that central nervous system response, that fight or flight response, to combat it. The first one we're going to talk about is the breath, because you might have noticed, if you've ever been scared before, or you've ever been really in a heightened nervous system activation state, you start breathing through your mouth shallowly, maybe holding your breath. Very common. This continues to drive fight or flight and our nervous system, because that feedback loop, your body is then hearing, oh, we're not getting a lot of oxygen, or we're getting short bursts of oxygen to our bloodstream. Think something's going on, something's wrong. And it kind of just becomes this feedback loop of negativity coming from your physiology, just piling on. And so we want to combat that with the breath by bringing on the parasympathetic nervous system to balance out that sympathetic activation, that fight or flight. So one great thing to do is just to pay attention. Am I breathing? How am I breathing? Am I breathing deeply? Am I breathing through my nose and getting that juicy nitric oxide that I need to calm down? Or am I breathing through my mouth where I don't have access to that? And we want to shift to breathing through our nose, focusing on our breath and breathing more slowly. Something else to keep in mind is when you are in flexion, it obstructs your airway. And a lot of us are just working in flexion all day also. So again, compounding with being on our phones, we're just getting pushed into the state more and more with our lifestyles. But when we're in this forward head posture, when we're curled in, it obstructs our airway, so we can't get full breaths. We really need to breathe into the diaphragm. The diaphragm is a 3-dimensional organ. It can expand in all dimensions, and so we want to fill that. And you might notice, as we're breathing together here in a second, that you don't breathe through your diaphragm. You breathe through your chest, just shallowly. We want to breathe into the stomach. We want the stomach to expand out. I like to hold my hand there to feel my diaphragm expanding, my stomach pushing out. And to do that, to breathe fully like that, you can't be in flexion. You have to adjust your posture. Something else that's happening when we're in flexion is we're actually depressing our organs, our stomach, our digestive organs, our liver, all of this, our lungs even. We can't digest food properly. We can't breathe properly. Things are piling on here that are going to be causing problems down the line. So bringing your attention when you're noticing your inflection a lot to the breath. And the breath should help you correct your posture. This is a lifelong journey that we're on here with fighting the fight or flight, the nervous system activated state. So be patient with yourself and just notice how you feel when you start to correct your posture. And it's going to probably feel like you're pushing against that gravity. You're pushing against those negative thoughts. It's not an easy thing to do. So do it repetitively. Take your time and notice how it feels to open up and to breathe more deeply. The second tip that I want to give you for fighting flexion during the luteal phase is postural. Okay, so we kind of worked on that with the breath because you actually have to have good posture to breathe, but we're going to take this to the next level. So opening even further, we're going to talk about 3 different techniques to push back against the flexion posturally. One of them is back bends. So you're going to tuck your chin in, you're going to roll your shoulders back, you're going to keep your hips in neutral. You don't want to tuck your hips in too much because that's going to put a lot of pressure on your low back and we don't want that. So you can even kind of stick your butt out if that feels more comfortable for your low back, but really just in neutral. And rolling your shoulders back and back bending. I like to hold my hands open like this to my sides and just repeatedly and breathing while you do that. 10 rounds of back bends throughout the day when you stand up, when you're starting to feel that flexion pushing you into the fetal position. Another option is yoga. Many of the yogic poses, camel, any warrior pose, you're opening up. Yoga, great option. But we want to do this regularly. So kind of moving into a yogic pose when you get up from working or a few times a day. The next one is just straight up power poses. So moving into a strong lower body and taking a power pose, like you just won something, or your sports ball team won something, or you passed an exam, or you found out you're pregnant, or you found out somebody that you love is pregnant, or whatever. I'm riffing, but some happy thing just happened and you're celebrating. That brings you into a power pose. There are various ways you can do that, but that is another way to combat that flexion. Now, there's a lot of mindset that goes along with this too, and I'm going to make other videos on mindset. I'm also going to make a breathwork video for you on the breathwork exercise that I teach with my students and clients and practice that I feel is the most effective for balancing the nervous system and combating this flexion. It's called the 4-7-8 breath. You can Google it, but we'll do a video with you as well. So stay tuned. Let me know in the comments what you think about this conversation. If you feel and you notice yourself in the luteal phase moving into that flexion. And give this video a like, share it, or subscribe to this channel if you want to join me in more conversations about hormonal moods and the nuances of reducing symptoms and getting your life back. Thank you for joining me today. I'll see you next time.